Well, hello everybody. Well, this is all very bizarre, isn't it, really? Hopefully you've had a look down the list of things that I've put down that I want you to do um, for your ongoing work for economics by Friday, the 27th of March. What I want to do in this video is just to give you an overview of where we are when it comes to theme 2 at this moment in time. Now you'll need to bear with me, my ICT skills aren't very good, so hopefully what you'll see are things appearing on the screen very shortly. Right, now what I'm doing here, I'm building up a very amateurish way of looking at the circular flow of income, output and expenditure. Now, the first thing first is households and firms are two very important economic agents. Remember, households are the country's consumers, so buying to satisfy wants and needs, but they're also the workers of the economy. So the second economic agent on here is the firms. The firms are obviously responsible for producing the output that we all need to buy to satisfy our wants and needs, but also demanding our labour so we can all earn money. And what you've clearly got between these households and firms is interdependence. Households need firms to access goods and services, but also to get income as well. Firms also need households in order to get workers to produce output, but also so they can get their profits as well. Right, so what we do, oh bloody hell, this isn't working very well, but let's go with it. Let's complete our circular flow of income, output and expenditure. Now, first things first, households will supply firms with factors of production, and that will obviously include land, labour, capital and enterprise. Now, in receipt for supplying those factors of production, households will then derive incomes. Those incomes could include wages from supplying labour, but also rental income from providing land. It could be interest on capital, so buying shares in companies or making investments, and that of course could be dividends as well. And obviously entrepreneurs also live in houses and they will derive profits. Now in this diagram we assume that households with their incomes will then spend it back on the output produced by firms. And this is the expenditure of the economy. And in exchange for giving our money back to businesses, we will be able to access the goods and the services from the economy. These added up together will give us the country's output. Now, if we were to look at income, if we assume it's equal to expenditure and that's equal to output, this gives us three different ways of measuring the size of the economy. So these three different things will give us the GDP of the economy. Right, now what I want to do now, if I can work out how to do it, is to think about how we can show this in different ways. So GDP of the economy can also be shown by looking at ADAS diagrams. Right, so what we do, we have on the axis price level, and we have real GDP. Now what we should all be happy with, because we've done a lot of work on this in class, that aggregate demand is the total demand for a country's goods and services. This is measured by the formula C plus I plus G plus X minus M. So C is consumer spending, that's demand from households for goods and services. Investment is spending by firms on capital goods. So this could be buying new factories, new machinery for factories, new deliveries for vehicles, new computer packages. G is government spending. So governments also demand from the economy. They will demand teachers, doctors, nurses, etc. They will build hospitals, fill potholes in on roads. They will buy police cars. All those different things will create a demand for output across the economy. X stands for exports. This is foreign demand for goods and services from the UK economy. So this is foreign demand for our output. And of course, at the end, we've got M, which is imports. And imports are a withdrawal from our economy. These are goods and services within our economy, but they weren't produced here. So these will be deducted from our overall aggregate demand. Now, X minus M will show us our net trade performance. So if the value of your exports are less than the value of your imports, you're running a trade deficit. But if the value of exports exceed the value of imports, then you are running a trade surplus. Now, an aggregate demand curve is downward sloping because as price levels fall, there'll be growing demand for UK goods and services. If price levels increase, well, then there will be fall in demand for UK goods and services. And that's the same idea as extensions and contractions in demand from theme one. Right, what we're then going to add is a short run aggregate supply curve. So we're looking here at what firms can produce in the short run with their existing factors of production. And then what that then gives us is our macro equilibrium point. And we label it P1 and Y1. Now, if we were then to think about an outward shift in aggregate demand. Now, of course, this will be driven by either a growth in consumption, a growth in investment, a growth in government spending, more exports, and or fewer imports. And we've done a lot of work on different factors that could affect aggregate demand. So to give you a few ideas, AD might move outwards due to an increase in consumption. And this could be driven by an increase in people's average propensity to consume. So the logic would be people are devoting a bigger slab of their disposable income towards buying output. It could be driven by lower tax rates on households. Lower tax rates could lead to an additional income, a marginal income, from which some of that people will buy more goods and services. It could be linked to a reduction in interest rates, which makes borrowing for both consumers and investors cheaper. That would obviously lead to a growth in aggregate demand as well. It could simply be government policy. So governments, for example, at the moment, due to the coronavirus, are increasing government spending to give the economy a little bit of a boost. Now, from the diagram, what we can do, we can think about how this change in AD is impacting on macro performance. An outward shift in AD is first of all going to lead to an increase in actual economic growth. So we've got an increase in GDP, which means the output of the economy is increased. So if we assume population has stayed the same, then this would lead to a growth in real GDP per capita and therefore improve living standards across the economy. What we would also say is this would then also create a growing demand for workers. So this can then create a growth in employment levels across the economy. Okay, so what we probably experience will be a reduction in cyclical unemployment in the economy. Now, what we'd also then say, this will also create a growth in inflation. As AD moves outwards, well, then we've got demand pull inflation taking place across the economy. So the high demand will mean that existing price levels, we've now got an excess demand. So to clear markets, price levels need to increase. Whether or not that inflation is bad would depend on where we are on with the current inflation rate. Now remember that the price stability would mean inflation of 2%. If this brings inflation closer to 2%, that's good. If it starts to mean inflation starting to exceed 2%, then this would of course be a bad thing. Now it was worth noting, if I just add something else to this diagram, that if AD was to move inwards, then what is happening in the economy is the exact opposite of what I've just said. Now at the moment, AD in our economy is falling again due to the coronavirus. This is driven by lower consumption. There's more and more restrictions on what people can and can't do in society. So we're limiting where people can go, which brings down consumption. So there's less demand for pubs and restaurants and cafes and holidays at the moment. That would lower consumer spending in the economy. Of course, this will also lead to lower profits for businesses, which mean that firms become a lot less keen to invest across the economy. But also because of the coronavirus and people have been worried about the certainty of our economy, they start to reduce things like average propensity to consume as well. So people start to save a bigger proportion of their income, which will bring down aggregate demand. Now, as you can see from the diagram, when AD falls, this time we have a reduction in real GDP. So the growth rate is now negative across the economy. GDP is now falling. This would then lead to lower employment. it's likely this would lead to cyclical unemployment, or what we call demand deficient unemployment. Lower demand for goods and services will mean that firms demand fewer workers. Now, what this will also do is to ease demand pull inflationary pressures on the economy. So this time, inflation rates will start to come down. This could lead to disinflation, which is where the inflation rate falls, or potentially, if it becomes really serious, could create deflation, which is when price levels across the economy start to fall. Now, what is really, really useful is if you can link this diagram to the circular flow. Okay, so when you've got a growth in aggregate demand, what it will mean is you've got more spending taking place across the economy. As households and firms spend more across the economy, firms have to respond by producing more output. As output expands, it means that factors of production are in bigger demand from businesses, so it leads to more people getting jobs. Profits are upon businesses, which means that people get more dividends back as well. And all this would lead to a growth in incomes. And as incomes start to increase, households can again increase expenditure, which will create a further growth in demand for output, which would further increase demand for factors of production. This process is called the multiplier effect. Now, guys, in this diagram, really what I've tried to do is to give you an overview of what we've done on aggregate demand. Hopefully you found this useful, but what I'll do, I'll shut up talking there and I'll hit stop. Thank you very much.